ready with your notes. This is special topics. We're talking about basically parts that fail and related to the heat transfer aspect of things. So what are most cylinder heads nowadays made out of? Aluminum. And they tend to work, crack, and blow gaskets if the temperature needle gets into the red and stays there for too long. Some engines, even the ones with cast iron heads, though, can take more heat than others. And those old Ford Tempos had a really bulletproof four-cylinder engine in them that had a camshaft in the block like an old V8, and they had a cast iron cylinder head, and those things could just take an incredible amount of heat without suffering damage for the most part. I saw some of them do that. They were really solidly built engines. But rings can lose their temper too. The piston rings can actually get to where they don't hug the cylinder walls good anymore because they get too hot and they lose a little bit of spring tension they have. And so hoses can split and plastic radiators can crack or clog with trash, and rust and everything. Plastic radiators can destroy an engine. So it's always a good idea to keep a close look at that. And if a vehicle has run hot several times, even if the radiator wasn't the cause of it, if it's running hot for some other reason, then the radiator is going to suffer for that. And that thing gets to pass a certain temperature several times, it's going to get more brittle. And then when it splits, and I've seen cars sitting beside the road when I'd stop to help somebody that would have a split radiator and the engine was just destroyed. They didn't even know it was going to happen. It was right before it gave out. I even made the audacious statement that, if we were going to do what was smart, we would probably change our radiator at about 120 to 150,000 miles just because. Just put a radiator in there because they don't cost all that much and everything. But anyway, let me see. I cannot talk to him right now. All right. So anyway, so you got rust. What about your Ferris water pump impellers? What's Ferris?
Ferris is like it's like the surface of a metal.
No, that's like anything that's iron or steel. That's basically, if a magnet will stick to it, it's ferrous metal.
Oh, yeah.
That's basically
it corrodes or something.
But if the if the impeller on a water pump gets consumed by rust, plastic impellers with aluminum hubs can get loose and spin on the shaft. I've seen that right here. Cavitation, that little place where that water pump, let me see if I can grab a water pump over here. Here's two water pumps right here. All right, now this is one water pump. This water pump here came out of a Dodge, and of course this little thing kind of been shoved down on here. But when I took this thing out of that Dodge van, see, this guy had already replaced everything but the water pump pretty much. But see, I can actually turn that I'm turning that separately. That's not supposed to be that way. That plastic impeller with that aluminum hub, when I first got this thing out of this van, because of this thing being in just the right place, I could actually move this with one finger on that shaft. It was that easy to move. And so what happens there is this impeller, see, this is a plastic, and so it's not going to rust away, but the clearance between these blades and the shaft and the surface they react against is critical. Now this one here is another water pump, and it's got a little ferrous metal impeller. But if for whatever reason there's too much space between here and there, you got issues. I had one of these little 2.8s, and this guy came in and he said my car was making a noise. Well, the bearings in the water pump on it, it's right over on the top, is in the timing cover, and it had actually got over to where the pulley was scraping against the timing cover. But that one, like the Pontiac we got out here, has got a cast iron impeller on the water pump, which is really robust. But it had machined away that aluminum surface behind it. So when we put the new water pump on there with good bearings, there was too much space, and it was trying to run hot. And so I've actually still got that timing cover with that water pump that we put on there, with a good water pump that we put on there, not the new one. And I cut it out so you could see how much space there was in between there because it had machined away that little surface. But anyway, and cavitation. Sometimes you'll see where there will be electrolysis will eat little dimples out in the reaction surface for that water pump, and it will cause that too. Now, if your water pump has got a smooth pulley bolted to this right here, if it's got a smooth pulley bolted to that, it's going to be spinning the opposite direction from the engine, right? If it's got a smooth pulley bolted to that hub that the back of the serpentine belt goes around, it's going to turn the water pump backwards, which is fine. But if on some of the ones, like if you would get a hub, huh? Oh, wait a minute. Hey, Kathy, what's going on in here? That's the belt, okay. But if you're going to get like on some of the Jeeps, you could get a water pump. Of course, it comes without a pulley on it. You get the wrong pump, it will bolt right on there. If you got one that was supposed to be, put that one on the desk. If you got one that was supposed to be have a V belt on it, and you put that drum belt on it, drum pulley on it, so that the back of the serpentine belt's supposed to be pulling it, then it'll spin it backwards, even though the water pump foot's right up there. The impeller is a different way, and it'll cause them to overheat. You know, because they'll say, yeah, this water pump looks right, and they'll hand it over across the counter. Now, that's on some of your older Jeeps. But you can actually route the belts wrong. If somebody, occasionally you'll see some yo-yo that'll take the belt, and instead of having a smooth side running across a pulley, you can snake them belts around and make them work if you keep trying different routing. And sometimes people will put the grooved side of the belt in toward a smooth pulley, which is kind of crazy, you know. But anyway, that'll turn the water pump backwards, and so on and so forth. Anyway, a healthy emission-friendly engine, it needs to run between 200 and 240 degrees Fahrenheit. I like them to run down closer to 200, but some of the electric cooling fans don't even kick on before the ECTC is about nearly 230, like on these Chevrolet Cavaliers and stuff, 228, like that Pontiac. That Pontiac doesn't turn on a single cooling fan until it hits 226, 228, something like that. You can look in the GM book. That's when it's supposed to be, and that's pretty high temperature window. And little things can upset the balance. When thermostats fail, they usually break and let coolant pass through just unchecked, or they open too soon if the spring gets weak, and I've seen that too. And a cold running engine is going to run dirtier in the tailpipe and in the crankcase, and sometimes it will cause it to have sulfuric acid build up in the oil. It'll start eating the engine parts away. I mean, you know, I had read somewhere a long time ago that 90% of the engine wear that engines experience is due to sulfuric acid coming out of the oil. You know, eroding the metal.
So that'd be the main reason why we actually change it.
Yeah, part of it. I mean, there's other reasons too, but sometimes I've had to order, though, 2 or 3 thermostats to get one that worked right. You know, the PO128 code I'm always talking about? If you get a PO128 code, like check engine light comes on, PO128 needs a thermostat. And there's nothing rocket science about that. Okay? If airflow and coolant flow, though, are really important. So every spinning blade that moves water or air needs to be operating at peak efficiency. That's just the way it is. Okay? But keeping the coolant where it belongs is important, too. You don't want it leaking out. One complication that we face is the obsolescence built into a lot of today's vehicles. And when I say obsolescence, that means that they're built, it seems like they're built to fail. You ever heard the term planned obsolescence?
Yeah.
They build them so they'll fail, so you'll have to buy another one. You know, so that most of them are not going to be running 10 years from now, they think, and maybe people will be getting another car. They don't have, if you've got something like a 92 or a 93 Crown Victoria or something like that, and you have this little power window switch panel over here that breaks, you're going to wind up having to go to a junkyard to try to find one. They probably aren't going to have one. You can't get a new one, so you got a busted door panel or something, you know, unless somebody can make you something. Let me say something to them. Hey, Derek, don't put anything in that. I mean, let me get with you before you charge that up. Can you charge that up? I'm talking about this here. Oh, it's still leaking water? Huh? I'm probably going to buy a part for that. All right. Sorry about that. All right, let me, anyway, 16 PSI, 200-something degree coolant goes through there. These plastic parts are going to pop. That's just the way it is. And there's these elbows, these little plastic elbows with O-rings on them that these General Motors cars have coming. Like on that 3.8 liter Oldsmobile out there, we've actually got these little plastic elbows that have a tendency to fail, and they keep them at the parts house. Yeah.
Is it possible the multi-function switch?
No, it's been replaced.
Huh?
It's been replaced.
It's been replaced?
Yeah.
Well, it says connected 208 is for the left turn signal and the right turn signal, which is on the left-hand side of the steering column. Which is
Feed some
unplugged.
power into those artificially and see if those lights come on. That's what I want to do next, okay? All right, so if you look at you can actually see those parts the way that they fail. I've also had one, there was a thing out here one time when I was working on that little Pontiac we got out there. It was sitting there and it was hot, right? And I'm working on it, and I noticed that I had an engine running, I was doing something else to it, and I noticed the radiator hose, and I need to show you this y'all on the big picture. I noticed the radiator hose was swelled up, and it was swelled up like as big as a balloon right there by the thermostat housing. I mean, it was just about to let go, and the water that was going through that thing was like 240 degrees. And I'm standing in front of this car. You see where I'm going with that? I mean, this was nasty. It could have happened. Anyway, the little plastic elbows, though, are a problem, and I actually have seen some of these older Buicks that would have a plastic part up under the intake manifold that was plastic, and it would fail. Right behind the alternator, you can't see this part, but if you see water just pouring out from behind the alternator, you pull the alternator off, this plastic fitting is broke. Well, the parts house will actually give you one that replaces it, and if it's perfect, it's made out of steel, which is better. I mean, that's a sort of an improvement and all that. But you see that swollen radiator hose right there?
Yeah.
I mean, I took a picture of that because it was really scary. You know, if that thing split and it had to be pointing at you, you're going to get fire hose with scalding hot water, and we're talking 30-degree burns. Imagine it going into your eyes. You see this blistering hot water. I mean, that's really nasty. You're going to look at there. Okay. All right. The water pump is a really active component. And I'll make sure I don't get sidetracked there. And so it's got to work really, really hard. And usually within 40 thousandths of an inch of the reaction surface is where those blades need to be. Okay, there was this, the one I want to tell you, this little story. This guy had a Mercedes 79 model 450 SLC. And he emailed me from South Africa. I talked about this one day to some people out there in the shop. But he emailed me and he says the water pump on his Mercedes was leaking. And had a small hole in the top of the pump. That's the weep hole where the water leaks out if the seal fails, you know. And this is the weep hole right here. You can see this one right here. You can see where that one was leaking out of its little weep hole right there. See that? See that? You can see the trail where it was leaking. And that's what that hole's for. If that seal in that pump fails, that water runs out that hole. They always have to. That water's got to have somewhere to go if that seal fails. It's just the way that is. Anyway, he says, I'm told as it's aluminum pump, if I buy a service kit, the bearing can strip the inside of the casing and rotate and cause damage. And he's also told it doesn't happen with a cast steel pump. So he's either got to pay for a new pump. He says a new pump is, I don't know what kind. I guess he's talking about some kind of rupees or some kind of money he's spent. Or a new pump is 3,000 of whatever this unit of money is, because I don't know if they have it in South Africa. I thought they used Kruger mans. I don't know. But he says, and the repair kit is 310 in local currency. He says 3,000 is half a month's take-home salary for him. And he was from Great Britain. He says, what should I do? Can I temporarily epoxy up the hole? Well, he's going to try to stop the leak. And so, what would you tell him? I said, well, for a temporary repair, try this. Add a couple of tablespoons of brake fluid to the coolant. And that may, and usually will, soften the seal enough to stop the leak. Now, there are some cases where there's rust particles and stuff that have gone through there and chopped up the seal, and it's just shredded. It won't work every time. But I don't know at the times that I've poured just a little dab of brake fluid in there, and you can see that water pump leaking, and it'll get slower and slower and slower, and it'll stop while you're watching it run. It may take 5 minutes or something, maybe 10. But that's a filling station trick I learned back in 1974 or sometime when I was working with this guy over there. And a lot of people don't even know about it now. However, when it stops leaking, You drain it and you refill the cooling system. Don't leave that brake fluid in there. It'll keep softening the seal until it leaks worse. See where we're going with that? And so I said, well, that's how to buy you some time. Well, a couple of days later, he sent me another email and says, well, knock me down with a feather. I put in the brake fluid and it stopped leaking. So anyway, we fixed a car that was on the other side of the planet by telling the guy to pour some brake fluid. Anyway, so another thing that people used to do to stop radiator leaks, if you had a little pinhole radiator leak somewhere, is break an egg in there. Just break an egg in the radiator. And that egg mixes in with the water and it kind of gets cooked. And that little bit of egg white will get in there and clog up that hole and it kind of quits it leaking. It's a kind of a temporary fix to get you back on. I've also seen black pepper. If you just dump some black pepper in there, that little piece of black pepper will get caught in that hole and it'll swell up and quit. That happens too, but really that's not the right way to do it. There was this 97 F-150 that sprung this coolant leak right after this cold snap I was talking about. And the guy figured the repair would be quick and easy, so he took it to the shop in town. And the shop quoted him $1,000, saying all the expansion plug needed to be replaced. $1,000. This is a 97 F-150 with a lot of miles on it. So he said, I don't think I want to do that. So he called me. He's one of our instructors, and he said, so brought it over here. We had one freeze plug leaking in the front of the right cylinder head. You can see that was one freeze plug that was leaking. And that may have made them think all the rest of them were leaking. Plus the cold snap made them think that maybe it had pushed some out. But the manifold up top, the intake manifold, the gasket had, given way. The ones that are made of plastic and silicone, how they like to break. It was just pouring water from there, and it was raining down everywhere, and it made them look like a freeze plug. We put intake gaskets on it. We put that freeze plug in it, and it would idle just fine and run cool. But when we tried to drive it away from the shop, it'd run real hot, real fast. And that's when we pulled the radiator had a bunch of trash in the flues. When we put one of those on there, and then we found out that all of these big flakes of rust had to have come from somewhere. So I thought maybe they come off the water pump impeller. So we pulled the water pump off, and the impeller had come off of the water pump and was laying in there, And so I like to show my viewers a picture of that, again over there. That was for my YouTube fans, as if I had more than a few. But anyway, another thing we got, when we're filling the cooling system, it's got a regular radiator cap. The vacuum tool works pretty good. There's this thing you hook your air hose up to, and it's a cone-shaped rubber thing that goes down the radiator cap. And you suck all the air out of the cooling system. It makes the radiator hoses go flat and all that stuff. And then you stick this hose off the other end of it down in a can of antifreeze, or tank of antifreeze you've already mixed 50-50, and open the valve, and the atmospheric pressure pushes it in there. Now that's supposed to make it so that it's not as prone to get airbound. And I've got one of them doggone things. The one that I've got cost $150. And, I can't really say that I'm all that sold on it, but we use it occasionally just because I got it. I don't know how I wasted the money, You open the bleeders. How many you know about the bleeders? You know about the bleeders. If you're filling up a cooling system, imagine yourself, look at this. I'm just going to draw this real simple. All right. Right here, you've got your thermostat. And your thermostat's going to open to let that stuff go through here. Coming out of your radiator hose, going up to your radiator. Right? Okay, now, on the bottom, let's say this is the cavity here.
It's leaking out between the motor and the transmission.
What, the flip go?
Huh?
You talking about?
That place called.
You mean coolant between the motor and the transmission? My goodness, we may have pulled the transmission out of that thing.
I did it.
Wow. Anyway, see this air that gets bound up in here? You poured it in here, and it's coming in through the bottom radiator hose and all that, but you got all this air up in here. And what's really a disaster is sometimes you'll have, and it's more complicated than I'm drawing it here, but sometimes your engine coolant temperature sensor will be in a place where there's an air bubble, and it won't be reading hot. And so, but you'll see it percolating and stuff. And remember now, if the fan comes on and stays on, and it just keeps getting hotter, there's a problem. And if it's airbound, it'll do that. But you got to keep working with it. Now, what I like to do is, if I can get to it, I like to take a heater hose loose, or the first one that leaves the water pump and goes, I take that one loose and I'll hold it up and I'll use a funnel to pour coolant in that heater hose to make sure as I can that the block's full. But I mean, every cooling system is different, and you kind of got to develop an eye for that. How's the best way to fill this cooling system so that I get rid of all the air and I don't burn it up, you know? But anyway, you know the cap that I put on there that I showed before, that cap that lets the surge tank catch the coolant. You know, you got this little thing going down in there that drinks like a straw, going over here to the cap. Then your cap has got a spring ordinarily in your radiator, and when it unseats, it pushes coolant from the radiator over here. All right, so if I take that off, so I'm just sealed around the very top, this can come and go as it wants to. You keep this, you fill this up as much as you can, you keep it full, and as it starts working back and forth, like it's going to do, you're going to wind up letting it'll actually fill itself up. It'll push whatever air in here, it'll get whatever coolant it needs back in here, and then at the end you don't have any pressure on it, so you're safe to take that cap off. And that would be the cap. I wish I had one right around here I could wave in front of the camera. But if you just take a radiator cap, you know, a radiator cap ordinarily looks like this, and it's got that spring-loaded part, and then it's got another little sealing area right down here with a little valve. If you take this off so that all your sealing is around the top of the cap, you'll have a tool like I'm talking about. And it works really good. What I used to get really disgusted with was I puked all over the floor. Now, what I do sometimes, if I drain the coolant out of something like an Explorer when I was working on, had to do something with the cooling system, and I knew that and the coolant was pretty and clean, and I was going to put that same coolant back in there, I would actually take my drain pan and set it up on top of the engine, not with the engine running, obviously, and I would take a little hose with a fitting on the end of it, a brass fitting, and start it siphoning. And let it siphon, just let it siphon real slow. I'm talking about a little hose, and I just walk away. You know, I put another drain pan under in case it ran over. But a lot of the time you would find out that because that coolant was going in there so slow, and the little thermostat got one of them little bleeder beads in it, you know, all of that antifreeze that came out of there would go right back in there. And it would be completely full again. And then I'd crank it up and make sure the thermostat would open and all that kind of stuff. There's a bunch of different ways people do that. They've also got these silly big funnels they're made. They got a little thing that locks onto the radiator cap, and it's a big funnel, big surge funnel. You can just keep pouring. The thing about it is, if you get it full, and this funnel is about half full above the radiator, you know, what are you going to do there? You're going to have to dip that stuff out or siphon it out or something like that? I mean, that's not really a very good way to do that. But there's all kinds of tool trucks and all that have these funnel kits you can buy, but you can, I mean, in my opinion, on most of the ones that have a radiator cap, you can do a better job with that cap that's had the spring took off of it than you can with that, you know, because you're not making near a mess on the floor. My computer support guy brought his 97 Camry to me one time with a real oddball dash panel vibration. This is another little off. This isn't really about cooling systems. It would shake the car when the blower was running. I mean, shake the dash, boo, 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 and turn it on fast. So we pull the blower motor out. It's got a little squirrel cage fan on it, and that thing was loaded with what looked like the remnants of an old dish rag. It was clean. It wasn't dirty stuff, but it was anytime the blower shakes, you got something in the blower, you know, and sometimes you may have a dead rat in there or something like that, you know, because whatever happens, if it shakes, you got to pull that fan out of there and see what's going on, you know. But he is definitely, he could not figure out how that bunch of stringy cotton rag made its way in there. I says, does your wife ever throw a cloth up on the dash or anything? And no, he says, she don't ever do that, but I don't know how I got in there. That's a mystery. But blowers work hard. Sometimes the connectors and the conductors fail. Anywhere from the junction box all the way through the blower resistor to the motor itself, they melt down. Have you seen melted connectors? I've shown you around here. You've seen connectors melt. Sometimes at the fuse panel. Did you know a fuse can melt without blowing? You can melt a fuse without, I mean, it won't be blown. This is an example right here. That fuse right there melted, and it didn't even blow. And that come off of a 2004 Chrysler Sebring. And whenever the fan wasn't getting any power, and I said, well, I'm going to check this fuse, so I pulled it out, and it had actually built enough resistance on that leg of it to where it just cooked that fuse. And that's why the blower didn't work. There's another one I found. It was and it had a fan motor vaguely like this one right here that I've taken apart. It was, and I think I got that fan motor over somewhere, but that doggone thing would pop the fuse every time you put a fuse in there. Some customers will take and they'll say, well, I'll do better than this. I'm not going to put a fuse in there. I'll just put a piece of wire in there, like a piece of Romex wire, and they'll burn wire harnesses up and everything else doing that. But what happened here was this particular fuse that the guy had would pop. So I measured the current with my charging system tester that fan was pulling, and it was pulling 60 amps, and which is a heck of a lot of current, you know. When you're spinning a starting a car, about how many amps does it usually pull when you're spinning now I'm not talking about a diesel, but it's a regular gas burning car. 150, 175 amps, something like that. This thing was pulling 60 amps is a heck of a lot for a fan motor to be pulling. The windings were all burned on the inside of it, and it was popping a fuse. We had to put a fan motor on it. One day, I'm traveling along, and now listen to this. This is important too. I saw this Ford Explorer beside the road with the hood up, and a bunch of guys around here, looking under the hood. And so I went over there and kind of just stopped because I had a little bit, and I got out and said, "What's going on here?" She said, "I'm driving down the road. I smell some smoke. Smoke comes out of the dash. Some smelly smoke comes out of the dash." And I just pulled over and shut it off because I was scared, it's going to catch fire or something. And these guys were looking around under the hood, and I said, "Well, let me see something." Opened the hood, and I smelled of it, and I smelled burning leaves. Well, the blower resistor is in that plenum, and when you park under trees, sometimes pine needles and leaves and stuff work their way down in there. And if they get caught on that blower resistor, it gets hot whenever you're on low blow. When you're on high blow, it don't get hot because it ain't flowing any current in. Yeah, and it caught fire to them leaves. Anyway, I told her, I said, if you'll turn off your fan, roll the window down, and drive it over to wherever your mechanic is, he can vacuum the leaves out of there for you. So, but there's no problem under the hood anyway.
So. Good about that.
Huh?
Pine needles are good about that because of their the amount of surface area they have for
Yeah.
their shape.
Yeah, they can go in a hole and go way down in there and get around something. But cooling fans are in a more hostile environment, and so one time there was some noises coming from under the hood of the Crown Victoria, and the whole fuel system, including the BCM, was cycling on and off like a turn signal flasher. And believe it or not, that was because the fan relay had burned up, and it was actually controlled by the PCM, and it was actually had created, because it melted down the right way, it created a short that was back feeding power to the PCM. But it had enough voltage drop there so that the PCM would turn on and immediately try to run the fuel pump, and that would cause the voltage drop to go below the threshold where the PM would stay awake, and then it would turn off, and then this voltage would come back up, and the PCM would try to run the fuel pump again. And what I heard was over in the area where the PCM relay was and the fuel pump relay, I heard click, 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 click. And this is with the car switched off. You see, because there was an electric. I've got that relay out there. I can show it to you. It just, this same thing that happened to that fuse happened to this relay, and it created that problem. And I was so bumfuddled by that. I'm standing over here by the master cylinder area, looking at this thing.
That Clement of it?
It's laying on the desk.
Okay.
Yeah. But anyway, I'm sitting here looking at that, and I'm saying, what in the world is causing this? I had my scope on there, trying to see any kind of pattern. I had the breakout box on it, and everything the PCM powered up was cycling on and off. Well, when I went over to the other side, I said, I'm going to pull some fuses and see what it is that, kills this. And then I smelled something. And because that high current relay center for that fan relay and the starter relay is on the other side, when I pulled the cover off of it, there it was. That cover snaps on it was hiding it where I couldn't see it. When you pulled it off, it was obvious that you had about a meltdown over it. And so what I did was I had that police car, it was a trainer car that they gave me from the police department, and it was exactly the same year model, and so I cut that high current relay center off of it and put it on that car and fixed it, and that's still on there now. That blue Crown Victoria, the dark blue one we got, 98 model. But anyway, that's pretty much the end of that. This one shop owner friend of mine, this is the last story I'm going to tell you. He got a 2006 Malibu, kept blowing the AC clutch fuse. And so when it got to the shop, there was other problems because the owner had took a piece of short 12-gauge Romex and made it into a U and shoved it down in the fuse terminals on the junction box trying to get the air conditioner to work. See, the clutch coil was shorted, and it was popping the fuse. And so he said, well, I'll make this thing work. And so he shoved that down in there, and it burned the wire harness up. I mean, the whole wire harness was destroyed. And so he called the Chevrolet place and said, can I get a wire harness for this 2006 Malibu or Impala or whatever it was? And they said, that's like $600, but we don't make it anymore. What? Don't make it anymore? And it's a 06? No, can't get it. And Donnie told the guy, he said, well, I can take the wire harness out of the car and I can split it with a razor blade and I can fix it wire for wire. You know, you start up here, you work your way down there, you replace that wire. You start up here, you work your way, you untangle the burned up wires. He said, I can do that, but I'm going to have to charge you like $80 an hour or whatever he charges for every hour it takes me to do that. And if it takes me 2 days, you're going to pay me $80 an hour for 2 full days. And the guy said, well, I ain't going to have it fixed. Well, he basically just trashed the car. Unless you can find a wire harness in a salvage yard or something like that. You know what I mean? That was a disaster all the way down the line. But there was this girl that told me one time, I told you that was the last story, but I lied. This is the last story. The waitress that was working at a restaurant I used to go to way back in the late 70s, a place called Sambo's down in Port Arthur, Texas. And there was a girl over there, and she says about her car, and I said, what happened to your car? She said, the engine burned up. I said, what'd you do, run it out of oil or something? She said, no, it caught fire and burned. And I said, really? And she said, well, I put the fire out, but the wire harness and everything's made. It was an old 63 Buick with a V6 in it. And she says, my parents gave me a ignition coil and a distributor cap and some spark plug wires for Christmas. But the other part of the wire harness is still messed up. And I said, well, let me go look at this. So I went over to her house and looked at it, and, she was still living at home. She was just a teenager. Of course, I wasn't but 20, so I was just barely. Anyway, so I opened the hood and went, oh, my word, this is a terrible mess here. And so I said, okay, let's see what we can do. So I unplugged the wire harness from everywhere it went, and I laid it out on my tailgate, and I had some wire and some connectors and all, and fixed it wire by wire. You just find this wire, you trach it through, you clip, splice a piece the right length in there, and kept on going. And then I put it all back together and plugged everything in and put the distributor cap on it and hooked up all the wires and fired up.
How long did that take?
It didn't take about an hour and a half. That car, but remember, it was a 63 Buick, so it didn't have but like 10 wires in the wire harness. There wasn't anything to it. I mean, you basically had a little bit of wire, but not much, And mostly it was the engine harness anyway. I mean, so how many wires goes to the engine harness on a 63 Buick with a V6 in it? Come on. You got points in the distributor and all that. Wasn't that hard to fix. And so I said, what will you charge me? I mean, she said, what are you going to charge me to do this? For labor, I said, $20, I guess, but because it didn't take long to do it, and I was just glad to get her going. And she paid me with 2 rolls of quarters. She was a waitress, you see, so she had tip money rolled. And so she's standing there. She hands me these 2 rolls of quarters. I said, I don't want to carry this. Can I get a couple of $10 bills? I mean, can you put these in the cash register? She says, yeah, but you'll have to write your name and address on them in case we find washers or anything in there. She hands them to me and then makes me put You see what I'm saying? I mean, anytime you take a roll of quarters, they're afraid you're going to have a bunch of stuff in there filling them up, that aren't money.
Yeah.
And so, but she was required to do that, even though she had just handed them to me, whatever. But anyway, that was a little wire harness fix. And you can do that sometimes. You can actually go wire by wire. And we've done that over at the Ford place. When you can't get the harness and they're willing to pay, you just split that harness and you fix it wire by wire. And you can make it happen, but you got to stay on task. This business about getting bored with it and walking off and smoking a cigarette and drinking some coffee, that's hogwash. You can't charge them for time that you spent taking a break. Anyway, did anybody got any questions or comments about that? Are you tired of hearing me talk? All right then, it'll be all right.